everybody, welcome back to One Loud Voice and our current series called The Upside Down Invisible Kingdom. Now, we're going to start off by just apologizing a little bit because we haven't been able to upload anything for the last couple of weeks, but we've been working on some new content and some other podcasts and some different things like that.
Right.
But we're here and we are going to stick in this with you, and we're going to keep on making more and more and more episodes as we move along. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the last one of the blessings of Jesus that he said to this big crowd of people that was sitting on this hill as he began his ministry. And this one, I don't know about you, but this one is a real challenge for me. It really, to think about this blessing and him calling it a blessing just kind of really makes me stop and say, what? Like, why would you consider this a blessing? So we're going to jump in this and really dive into what we believe Jesus is trying to get across. And I'm just going to say, at least for me, this one kind of hit me right between the eyes. So let's dive in. I'm going to read it first. It's Matthew chapter 5, and it's found verses 10 through 12. It says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before me." Now, from the front end on this whole thing, it's like, why would Jesus say that we're blessed? And to me, I think this hits us square in the eye on this topic, and it's our loyalty. I think when what Jesus is really trying to get at is if you're loyal to me, yours is the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
And what does that loyalty look like? I'm just going to kind of start from this perspective is that at least here in America, in American churches, oftentimes a relationship with Jesus is almost defined down to raise my hand, say a prayer,
Right.
accept Jesus into my heart, and now
We're
he's
good.
going to be here. Right. Yeah. But now he's here for me. He's here to fix my problems.
Right.
He's here to make sure that I go to heaven and I don't have to suffer. I don't have to go through pain. I don't
Right.
have to deal with anything. And I really think that that's a wrong image
Absolutely.
of everything that Jesus came and said and did.
Well, I think that you've got to also understand when he talks about persecution, his definition of persecution is much different than what we think. When somebody disagrees with you, that doesn't mean you're persecuted.
Right.
When somebody doesn't like you or like the way you live or like your choices, that does not mean you're persecuted. When you don't get your way, you're not persecuted.
You're not persecuted. Yeah.
But we believe that, right? And even the secular society in our world today, everybody's got their feelings hurt. Everybody is wearing their feelings on their shoulders and they're on their sleeve, just like, well, I get to feel how I want to feel, and you're not allowed to hurt my feelings, and we're going to cry it out and hug it out. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having emotion and having feelings. Those things are real and valid. But people disagreeing with you does not make you persecuted. And I think that the persecution, I know the persecution Jesus is talking about here, we don't have a clue about yet.
No.
And there are parts of this world where people are persecuted for their faith.
Absolutely.
They are beat down and destroyed for their faith. And
their lives are at risk.
Absolutely. And there's people maybe even in this country that have been persecuted. I know of a story of a lady who was a follower of Jesus and her husband was highly abusive and not. And if he found out she was reading her Bible or doing anything, he would just beat the mess out of her. That is persecution.
Gosh. Yeah.
That is persecution.
Right.
You not letting me have my way is not persecution. So I think that we need to clarify that because people are like, yes, I'm so persecuted. No, you're not. We don't know. I'm not saying that life's not difficult. I'm not saying that people aren't jerks sometimes, but what the Lord is talking about here and what is being written in Matthew is not something that we fully even know how to wrap our brains around.
No.
Right?
And Jesus is going to walk this out, obviously,
Absolutely.
in his life. And it doesn't just begin and end at the cross. I mean, if you read through the Gospels, you're going to see time and time and time again where the Pharisees and the Sadducees and stuff tried to, corner him. They picked up stones to throw at him, and he walked right through it.
Right.
So.
Well, and then even after his death and resurrection, the way many of the disciples died was in a persecuted way. They were martyred for their faith.
Sure.
So it is something that you do see. I don't remember who said it, but I want to make sure that you know that it wasn't me. This isn't my thought, but that sometimes dying for your faith is easier than living for your faith. And I think that could be said as much about today as it was during this day and time, because living for your faith means all in. You're 100% in. You're not a Christian on Sunday. You're not a Christian when it's convenient. It is, I'm going to walk out my faith. Are we going to be perfect? Absolutely not. Are we going to make mistakes? Of course. But it is choosing to take up our cross, follow Jesus. It's choosing to be a disciple of Jesus. That is more difficult at times than just letting go and giving up, and being martyred for your faith.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and it really proves the fact that we aren't called to an easy road.
Right.
We're not called to this land of butterflies and rainbows. It's really something that Jesus, when you look at his life, he walked this thing out in front of his disciples.
Right.
And what mattered was that he spoke the truth. What mattered is that he lived this life of compassion, and that, he healed the sick and he raised the dead, and he preached the good news to the people that were beat down and broken. And he didn't avoid pain.
Right.
Because of it.
Well, and I think that for people who are, if you're listening to this or watching this, and you're like, well, that's been my struggle in following Jesus, because what you're talking about is not really necessarily something I want. You're talking about a difficult road. Let us clarify. Life is difficult in itself. Mm-hmm. There are hardships, there are trials, there's tribulations. Both Christian and non-Christian experience COVID together. We've all experienced the shutdown. We've all experienced inflation. We've all experienced different things that have, for some, it's rattled them to their core. We're not saying that following Jesus means you're following a difficult life. Mm-hmm. I think that life can be difficult with or without Jesus as your God, but having a relationship with Jesus makes going through the difficult times easier, because you have an eternal perspective. You have an understanding that what I'm in right now, I don't have to stay stuck here. It may be horrible. It may be uncomfortable. It may be lonely.
Right.
But I don't have to stay stuck in this place. And I know I'm not sitting here going, what's going to happen? How's this going to end? I can say, I may not know with Jesus. I may not know what this looks like, but I know who does, and he's on my side. Yeah. That changes everything. I think when you look at what the Lord is calling people to, and you're like, man, I don't know if I want to sign up for that. I think instead of looking at, hey, life is great, but if I sign up for this, it's not going to be great. I think it's recognizing if I sign up, if I decide to be in relationship with Jesus Christ, that means whatever I face, the good and the bad, the highs and the lows, the blessings and the losses, he is with me. And I think that has to be clarified, because when you jump into this, it's just like, wow, that's a lot. Well, take him out of the picture. How's it working for you?
Right.
It's lonely.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much money you have, how much success you have. There is a void and a loneliness that only Jesus can fill. right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it isn't even just an eternal perspective either, that, that when we go through things, that there's this reward of heaven
Right.
and life eternal and all those other
There's
things
reward
on the other
now.
end, because we get to walk through this and get the truth
Right.
out of his word as we walk.
And what does the
with
Bible say?
Jesus,
When you know the truth, it does what?
sets you free. It
Right.
makes you free.
Yes, and
Yeah.
there's nothing, there is not a price. I mean, we live in a country that was founded upon freedom.
hmm
Freedom is priceless. Slavery is still a
Right.
thing. It's still a thing
Right.
in this country.
Yeah.
But what we fought, what so many men and women have laid their lives down for, was for freedom. We understand that
Sure.
that is a invaluable concept. It's something that we live every day not thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you leave your home, when you go to work, when you do what you do, how often do you stop and go, hey, I got to do that because somebody died for me? We don't think
Yeah.
about it
Right.
like that.
Right. Yeah.
But there have been, our freedom in this country is on the backs of countless men and women who
Mhm.
have fought
Yeah.
for that.
It's not free.
It's not free, right?
Right.
And so but the truth sets you free. What
Mhm.
Jesus did brings a level of freedom that we will never even know how to wrap our brain around.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. And it wasn't free to him either.
It was not.
I mean, as we sit here today, we're in Easter weekend,
Mhm. Right.
and we are about to celebrate the resurrection and the life that Jesus gave to us
Right.
when he rose from the dead. I mean, today
Represents. Right.
really the worst day of Jesus's life as
Right.
far as what he had to go through.
Right.
So it wasn't free to him.
No.
It cost him everything.
Yeah.
But now when we come back to this whole thing, because he's not going to preach something to us and not live it. He's
Right.
not going to say, "Hey, blessed are you when you're persecuted, because yours is the kingdom of heaven."
Right.
He was the forerunner. He
Right.
was the one who walked through this ahead of all of us
Right.
and said, "Hey, I'm going to go in front of you. I'm going to go before you. I'm going to walk this path. And I'm going to make a way for you to have this amazing eternal life with me and this relationship with God the Father, with me, with the Holy Spirit." And so he walked down this road of pain.
Right.
He walked down this road of persecution. And then he says, "Come follow me.
Right.
Come follow me."
Well, I think we need to look at the fact that, going back to the very first episode of this upside down invisible
Mhm.
kingdom,
Right.
when we started Matthew chapter 5, it was clear picture was painted that Jesus was talking to his disciples. He was teaching them. His posture was sitting and
Mhm.
teaching.
Right.
But then behind those disciples were the crowds that had gathered, that had had diseases and incurable infections and demonic oppression and
Right.
possession. And he had just set them free. All those people were outcasts. All those people had been persecuted.
Mhm.
All those people had been thrown away by society. All those people had been dismissed and ignored. And
Yeah.
those are the people that Jesus started with. And he starts his teaching to his disciples saying, this is going to happen. But my example today is to tell you, go after those people.
Right.
Pursue
Right.
those people. Love
Yeah.
those people. And know that because you
Mhm.
do what I did, people aren't going to get you. And that's okay.
Right. Right.
People aren't going to understand why you fight for injustice. People aren't going to understand why you stand for the broken and the hurting. But I need you to do it because I did it, because that's what's important.
Right.
So remembering as you go through Matthew chapter 5 and you're breaking this down, remember who he's talking to. He's talking to us. Because as his disciples,
Yeah.
as follower of Jesus,
Right. Right.
but he's also, that's the first layer. The crowds behind the disciples were the people that just
Mhm.
experienced
Yeah.
freedom, a touch, just eye contact. I mean, these are
Yeah.
people that people would go to the other side of the road to avoid walking near.
Yeah.
And his
Yeah.
opening statement says, this is yours. This is what
Yeah.
I'm asking you to do.
Absolutely.
I think that understanding persecution in the sense of what he's talking about in 10 and 12,
Mhm.
it's understanding what's the scene.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
happening there?
Right.
And then what does that look like in our day-to-day desired homes with the white picket fence, 2 dogs. Like, let's get outside of our bubble for a moment and let's look at what's he talking to us about?
Right, right.
What's he asking of us here?
Mm-hmm.
And salvation does not mean our life becomes easy, it becomes pain-free. We're actually going to have to go through some things. Actually, you're not saved. You're going to go through some things, right?
Yeah.
But you're going to go through some things. You're going to have moments in your life that you have to endure things that are not comfortable.
Yeah.
But some of that is because you choose to follow Jesus.
Right, right. But it's also, and let's be 100% clear about this too. This isn't something like, this isn't our goal to get persecuted. You know what I'm saying?
No.
And I don't think that's what Jesus was teaching and saying.
Absolutely not.
He's simply saying, be loyal. And when you're
Beautifully
loyal,
said, be
when
loyal.
you're loyal, you are going to face some opposition.
Well, you think about anything else you're loyal to. Like you just go to I don't know, this is not in any way comparison, people's relationship with Jesus, but what about loyalty to your favorite baseball or football team?
Yeah.
What happens if you are a Houston Astros fan and you meet somebody, you got a Astros hat on and you meet somebody with a Braves hat? Neither one of you play for those teams, right?
Yeah.
You do not play for the Astros.
Mm-hmm.
This joker doesn't play for the Braves, but all of a sudden you become, because of your loyalty to that team, you become a target. If that's not persecution,
especially
I understand
if the Braves beat the Astros.
Absolutely. I mean, we live in Houston, so right? So, but the idea is, that's a very minor example, but whatever you're loyal to, whoever you're loyal to, wherever you're loyal, those or that is unloyal to that thing will come against you. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it works.
Right.
If you are a vegan, beef eaters don't get you. If you are a beef eater, vegans don't get you. Mm-hmm. If you are whatever you're pro, people that are against that are not going to line up with you. That is something we face every day. Now, this is on a bigger scale. Right. This is on an eternal scale. When you are loyal to Jesus, when you're loyal to his teaching, when you're loyal to his commandments, when you're loyal to his way of life, the enemy and the kingdom of darkness is against you, and you have to decide, what's it worth?
Yeah.
And really that nobody can make that decision for any of us. Like, we have to personally decide.
Yeah.
And we do. The Bible's clear. You can't be partway in. Mm-mm. You're either all in or you're not. You don't get to play both sides of the fence. Like, it's not an option.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
but there's a good thing about that, though. Because if you and I stop, if we all stop and really think about the moments in our life when we've grown the most, when we have really gone deeper in our faith, it wasn't those moments where everything was perfect, where everything was just, an amazing day. It was walking through some hard times and learning that God was faithful, that God was there with you, and having to dive into God's word and really go, where is the answer? How do I get out of this? How do I get through this painful moment in my life?
Right.
And those were those places where we really grew. And so there is a blessing on the side of when we're persecuted, that it does force us to this place of growing.
Right.
Yeah,
that's good.
So, but I think that's a good place for us to stop and take a break.
Right.
And so.
Yeah. So if you're doing this in a study with people in a group, or if you're doing it by yourself, we know so many of you guys are doing this on podcast form and not in video, but this is a great place to stop, pause. If you're journaling, if you're just reflecting, ask yourself, does the idea of God allowing us to go through pain bother you? Can you see moments in your life or others where change occurred because of pain? I mean, that's a great, let's talk about this. Dive into that. Dive into it with yourself. Like, be vulnerable in this moment, because this is a subject, like what Phil said, this is a hard one. Like nobody wants to talk
Mhm.
about this.
Right.
Can we move
Nobody
on?
wants to
Can
do
we
this.
move past this? Let's move back to the other things that the Lord's doing in our lives. Let's
Yeah.
dive in for a moment, okay?
Yeah. All right, so let's move on.
Okay.
Because I think that these verses, verses 10 through 12,
Right.
go hand in hand with verse 8.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
subject that we talked about just a couple of episodes back, and that is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And when I think about this place of having to be loyal to Jesus, when I think
Right.
about this opportunity, which way am I going to go? Am I going to take the easy road? Am I going to take the hard road? Doesn't it really come back to our heart? Doesn't it
Right.
really come back to it? Where is my heart? Is my heart pure? Am I sold out to Jesus? Am I sold out to the kingdom of God? Am I
What's your
putting
motivation?
that first?
Right.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to pure at heart goes to the motivation of the heart. Right?
Mhm.
Why? Why are you doing it?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your end goal here? What's your game? What's your
Yeah.
motivation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it really kind of came real, like, crystal clear for
Mhm.
me. I was listening to a podcast by Tim Mackey a couple
Yeah.
of weeks ago, and I think I shared that
Yeah.
with you. And
Tim
and he was-
Mackey is the founder of the Bible Project.
yes,
And
absolutely.
fantastic. If you are someone that is looking at, look, I want to dive deeper into
Mhm.
contextual study, highly recommend the Bible Project.
Yeah.
They have a lot of free resources. Please, in the day and time we live in,
Mhm.
you can Google anything and you can get a lot of people's biblical perspective, and it can take you down a really unhealthy road.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is a great, we're not getting paid to plug this, but
Right.
but seriously, it's something that's
Yeah.
been a great we've got several sources that we study and follow
Yeah. Yeah.
and dive into. And is he right on everything? Are any of us? Probably not.
Right.
But
right.
because he's
Exactly.
human. But we both feel like there is, for the most part,
Very solid truth.
solid
Yeah.
contextual teaching. And so
Yeah.
the Bible Project, you can look
Mhm.
that up. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no. I'm glad. I'm glad that we kind of
Yeah.
let our listeners and our viewers in on some of the people that we're following and
Yeah.
listening and growing, because none of this stuff is like, it's not like brand new to anybody.
None of it. And really, it's
Bible
not.
says there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Right.
And so we're
But
all studying, we're all growing. The
Yeah.
Bible says to study to show yourself.
approved.
That's right. And so,
Absolutely.
okay, go ahead with your
Yeah.
Tim Mackey
Okay.
thought.
So Tim was talking about the crucifixion of Jesus.
Right.
And he was talking about the disciples, and he pointed out something that I never really thought about the way that he mentioned it, and that is that we would not even have an eyewitness, like an eyewitness account of the crucifixion and the persecution that Jesus went through, the beating and everything else, and him walking down the road, if it weren't for the women disciples
And John.
that stayed,
Right.
that stayed around. And because, all the rest of the guys took off, the
Right.
guys were gone. But
Except
here
for
you
John.
have- except for John, yes,
The beloved
and John, even John, though,
was in and out.
there was some moments where John took off, and then he must have come back, because he's there at the foot of the cross and everything
Right.
with his mom. Jesus looks, we know,
And we
all
don't
that,
know
right?
when John was
right.
there. Like, let's go ahead and
when he
preface
was
that.
and when he wasn't.
Right. But there was clear evidence that the women were there the whole
Right.
time. Most of it probably was because they were also there to support Mary, his mother.
right.
Because I'll tell you, as a mama, I'm not leaving my baby's side.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
my son was on death row or whatever,
Yeah, you're going to be right
not
there.
a chance. I'm going to stay right there
Yeah.
and not leave his side.
Mhm.
So that definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but just looking at that whole thing of these women who just stayed right there, and the things that they watched, the things that they saw happening to Jesus, but their hearts were pure. Their loyalty was devoted to
Mhm.
Jesus. And
In the good and bad.
yeah, yeah. And
It would have been so much easier to say, I can't watch this. This makes
Mhm.
me uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I want to skip out on this and to just go away.
yeah.
But they
But they
stayed.
but they stayed,
Mhm.
and they didn't just stay until he took his final breath.
Right.
They stayed. They watched them take his body down. They
Right.
watched them take and put his body in a tomb. And then even after that, they stuck around
Right.
and they kept going back. Hey, they. It's like they couldn't leave. They just had to hold on.
Right.
And in those moments of desperation, in those moments of we thought that this was
Gonna look different.
yeah,
Right.
we thought that Jesus was going to restore everything. We thought that Jesus was going to fix all these issues and these problems going on in our world, in our life. And how many of us are in those moments oftentimes too, going through COVID, going through hard times? It's like we
Diseases like
just
cancer.
yeah. And if we
Yeah.
thought it was going to look different, we
Right.
thought things were going to be different. We
Right.
thought that Jesus was just going to come in and just fix it all, and then life was going to be better.
Well, what about situations where you're in a community of other believers and because of their humanity, they hurt you? A church people, how many people I know that
Mhm.
it's been detrimental, the things that have happened in their church. And it's like,
Yeah,
wait a minute, we were all worshiping God together. And like,
yeah.
where was he in all this? How did this happen? And
Mhm.
why did these kind of things be allowed in the church?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I mean, it's not always cancer, a physical cancer. Sometimes it's a spiritual cancer, really. I mean,
Yeah,
where
right.
there has been pain and rejection and manipulation and things based off of money and gain that you see happen,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And why does that happen? Why does that happen in the church? Because the church is made up of people that are not
Right.
perfect.
Yeah, and people are people.
That's right. You and I, we're not perfect. And
Right.
yet God calls us to join him
Mhm.
in spite of our imperfection, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Absolutely. So I think this might be another opportunity for us to take a break and
Right.
really stop and just kind of think about and talk about our loyalty.
Hard question.
Will you stand with God when others won't?
Are you loyal?
Yeah.
Ask yourself that,
Yeah,
right?
right. Yeah.
Say what you said just again. That was good. Will you stand?
With God when others won't. Will you be there when no one else is willing to? And that's that guy. Like
If
I
the
said,
whole, like, think about that for a second. And if you guys are doing like I said, this, take a break, whatever. But if the whole church turned their back on Jesus,
Mhm,
would you?
yeah. What about your family?
Right.
If your wife, your husband, if your kids turn their back on
Your
Jesus, if
parents.
your parents turn their back on Jesus.
Right.
One of my favorite verses in Psalms, it says this. It says, even though my father and my mother were to forsake me, then you, Lord, will take me up.
Right.
And even though I had amazing parents,
Right.
my mom and dad were just awesome, awesome people. And I love them. They're both have gone to be with the Lord, but they never would have, nor did they forsake me. But I love that verse because I could always come back to it and say, you know what? Even if they forsook me, you won't,
Right.
Jesus. And
So take that break and ask yourself, what is for you? What does loyalty look like?
yeah,
And are you loyal? Why? And are you loyal to the Lord? And like what
Yeah.
Phil just said, even if others don't, would you stand with God. Like, I love that.
Yeah.
So stop what you're doing, ask yourself, discuss it, and then jump back with us.
Yeah. So I just mentioned my parents.
Right.
And I had the amazing opportunity to actually get to officiate my both of my parents'
Yeah, I was going to say, you
funerals.
did both your mom and
Yeah,
dad.
both my mom and my dad.
Number what, 5 years apart?
About something like that.
Mhm.
And when I did my dad passed away first, and doing his funeral and just thinking back through his life and the moments, because dad passed away from cancer. And so there was about a 3-month process from the time that we knew that, hey, this is probably not going to go well,
Right.
until my dad passed away. But watching over the course of those months as dad, progressed in cancer, there were so many people that would knock on the door. You were there oftentimes.
Yes. Well, let me
we're
tell
sitting
you,
there,
they would show up early in the morning, and the way Phil's parents' house was built was around their dining room table. You walked into the dining room. You didn't walk into a foyer or the living room, or you walked right into the dining room. And I would wake up in the morning and I would hear voices from the dining room early coming, billowing down the hall, of strangers to me, not to them, but people
Right.
that had not been around for several years, that stopped by and were sitting at the table, drinking a cup of coffee, talking about the impact that not just your dad, but your
No.
dad and your
Right,
mom
right. Absolutely.
had made on them. And I remember feeling like if I walked in, I was walking into something like private and
Yeah,
sacred.
something sacred.
So
Yeah.
I sat many times
Mhm.
in the hallway on this bench early in the morning and just listened to the testimonies
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
these people were saying when I was, I was wild and I got kicked out of my house and you brought me in, and,
Mhm.
these different stories. And I'm just like, wow, these people, they're not pastoring a church. They're
Right,
not,
right.
rich in the sense of what society says, but yet they were the hands and feet of Jesus on this earth.
Right,
And
right.
I'm sitting here listening to these stories. And what was so cool was Phil's dad was in like a special chair type thing in the living room. And whether he could fully respond or not, he got to hear it.
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. That was a really precious moment for me.
No, it was. And at the time, and we still are, but at the time we were in full-time ministry,
Yeah.
and listening to those people that walked through the door all
day.
all day, all night,
All the time.
and it was just like person after person after
Yeah.
person that came in and said, "Thank you for making an impact in my life. Thank you for changing my life. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being there for me."
For living out your faith. Like,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I heard
Right.
people say, "Thank you for living out what you taught." And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
that's
Right.
amazing.
And it really challenged me because I'm in full-time ministry, and I sat there listening to all these stories and saying, what would people say about me?
Right.
If I were to pass away today, if I were to be the person with cancer and I'm sitting here in this chair, would all these people come and say these kind of things to me?
Right.
Even though I'm in full-time ministry, and it really made me take some strong evaluation of my life. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because, to me, my dad, my mom were pictures of loyalty.
Yeah.
They were pictures of people who were loyal to the cause of Jesus. They were pictures of people, not perfect people by any stretch of the imagination, not perfect, but their hearts were pure. And I believe that if Jesus were to say these verses to anyone, he was saying it. He would say it to them.
Yeah.
And so as we kind of close this episode, that's where we want to kind of bring this challenge to is,
Well, hold on, because
yeah,
something happened that I think is important, because those people all said that. But then there were people that didn't get to come to the house that were at that funeral that you officiated.
mhm,
And so sitting there watching, holding my babies who are brokenhearted because they don't understand why their grandpa has passed,
mhm,
and watching their daddy, my husband, stand up in this pulpit with a sanctuary and an overflow full of people.
yeah,
Phil not only got to speak the truth about who his dad was, he got to tell the stories that other people had come in. And
mhm,
it's like my thought, listening to Phil talk about how what he wasn't, but what he was,
yeah,
right? That
right, yeah,
he wasn't a noted scientist, but he understood the chemistry of life. He
yeah,
wasn't a doctor, but he understood how love heals. And I mean, these things
mm,
that were so
yeah,
powerful. And yet the whole time he's talking and I'm listening to people all around, yes, and seeing them nod their head.
mhm,
And this man had lived a long life,
yeah,
and thinking, what is to be, this sounds super, super kind of morbid, but what would be said of us? What would be said of me?
yeah, right,
That when it comes to, as a disciple of Jesus, as someone who is called to loyalty. Like we saw that played out in your daddy's life.
mhm,
Like,
yeah,
what will be said of us, when we pass?
right,
So I don't know. I think that it was a beautiful end. And I mean, this podcast is obviously not about your dad, but it was a great example of someone who was not all the things the world tells us to be, but yet he was
right.
he wasn't perfect, but such a
It
beautiful,
was ornery.
he was, but such a beautiful example of what this is talking about,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah. If there's one thing my dad was, he was loyal.
Yeah, to a fault.
And yeah, and that's what we're bringing out about
Right.
these verses is not that we're trying to get persecuted.
Right. Right. And also that
That's
persecution
yeah,
isn't always what people think it is, right?
right. Yeah, exactly. So that's not the goal. Hey, go out and get persecuted this week. No, the goal is be loyal.
Right.
And if persecution comes along, will you stand with
Mhm.
God when no one else will? And I think that's the
Yeah.
challenge.
Well, so the challenge this week is to take some time to evaluate your priorities. Really evaluate your priorities.
Mhm.
Are there areas in your life that you are more loyal to yourself maybe than God?
Mhm.
And are you willing to change that? And I think that deserves some attention.
Absolutely, it does.
And
It
maybe some
does.
discussion. If you are doing this by yourself, maybe find somebody that you can talk to and really have this discussion, because to me, this is something that also needs some accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
That I'm loyal to my studies, I'm loyal to my job, I'm loyal to my family. Nothing wrong with that. But does that
Yeah.
take the place of
Right.
God?
Yeah. And sometimes we need someone else's perspective. To your point, sometimes we need someone else's
Right.
perspective to say, you don't quite got the right picture.
Right. Or let's look at this from a
You do
different
have
angle.
a higher priority here than you think you do.
Right. Exactly. So y'all check that out and discuss that with each other and with yourself. Be honest.
Yeah.
And and again, like you said, it's Easter weekend.
Yeah. And so if you're watching us
Mm.
this weekend, happy Easter to you.
And if you're not, if you catch this later on, remember every day is a day to remember what Jesus did for us and the price he paid.
Absolutely.
And you're called, and he has a plan and a purpose for your life right where you're at today.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you again so much for joining us. And we are so glad that we're able to put this content out there and help you
Absolutely.
grow. Remember, One Loud Voice is all about a discipleship project that we are trying to help you grow as a disciple of Jesus. And so until we see you again, we're so excited to have you with us. And you guys
Have a
have
great
an
day.
awesome week.